Welcome back to another episode of Dentside Depot. In today's episode, we have the F100 pulled in, and we're going to be doing some engine work to it to finally get it running right. Now, a little update on this truck from the previous video. It did run and drive, barely. It stalled out every 30 seconds or so, but I was able to pull it out of the shop, spin it around, and drive it back into the shop where it's sitting right now with a little bit of issue, but it worked okay. I'm not totally sure if the clutch is good yet or not, but it was at least running and driving. What we're going to do today is we're going to get this engine torn all the way down. I have a lot of the boring stuff already done, taking hoses off, the radiator was shot, alternator, belts, lines, and everything else. Getting all of that off and out of the way. What you're going to see in this video today is we're going to pull the top of the engine off, the manifolds off, the plugs, and we're going to see what we got. I have not taken anything off this engine yet, so as it's being filmed, you will see exactly what it looks like, and we'll hope it's good. I have a feeling that the valve guides, valve seals might have an issue because it was very smoky. I'm not planning on pulling the head off of this truck, but once we break it down, if it looks really bad, that may have to end up being the case. But we'll see how it happens, and hope you enjoyed this episode as we tear down this engine. So here we go. Okay, so I already have the carburetor mostly disconnected at this point. Just got to pull the two studs out of it. Now, this carburetor will not be going back on. It is a 1-barrel carburetor, and obviously that's not ideal for making any power and really for driving. And it was running so bad that it's almost certainly needs to be completely rebuilt, would be my guess. And that's not something I'm necessarily looking to do right now because I have many other trucks that need to get done. So we are going to replace this carburetor with a Holley 4-barrel. That is a 390 CFM, and that is what is recommended when you're doing this job. Now, the other thing that we're going to be doing is we're not going to be reusing the stock intake manifold or the stock exhaust manifold. We're going to put an Offenhauser dual plane intake on it, and we're going to put a set of headers on it. Nothing super expensive, but it should run better that way. Okay. Let's see if this will pop off here. Yep. I already got the throttle linkage and the choke disconnected. And there's still some gasoline in it. And it's definitely pretty dirty. Alright. Now we're going to take the studs out for the exhaust manifold. Okay, just want to hit these by hand here first and just see if they're going to move. And this one's moving just fine, which is good news. I'm not surprised. This truck's so rust-free that I felt pretty good that this stuff was going to come out just fine. There's the first one. Threads look like they're in really good shape. I did hit it with PB Blaster this morning to make sure, or at least to help, that they would possibly come out, and that seems to be the case at this point. And this one's for the exhaust here. Now, I have not touched a straight 6300 since probably 2006, so it has been a long time since I have worked on one of these engines, and I can tell you where I'm at right now, I'm probably 45 minutes of labor into it at the most. They're just so simple and easy to work on, and they're a lot of fun. Okay. These are in such nice shape, I'll probably just reuse these. I did get some aftermarket ones from Amazon that were Dormant brand, but I don't think I'm even gonna need them. I don't know if the Offenhauser intake will fit with the factory ones. I've never put one of those intakes on, but we shall see. I really don't know. Other thing I like about the Offenhauser intake is it just looks really cool. And hopefully it'll run a lot better with it on there. So I've driven this truck probably 100 feet at this point, and the engine's probably run for a total of 3 minutes. So I really don't know what it's gonna look like once we get this valve cover off. But like I said, I'm pretty sure the valve seals are probably bad. But that smoke could have been just from sitting, or potentially it's just smoky when it first starts because it's just leaking in between. I don't know. This one seems to be a little bit of a pain, so I'm gonna get this one out and then come back in. Okay, got that back bolt out. Had to go from underneath instead of on top to get that one out. So now we're doing the exhaust. Manifold bolts, my hope is that this will all come off as one unit. We shall see. The reason I'm using hand tools is because I don't want to damage the threads on the manifold. So I'm just going to break them all loose here until they feel good. Go. First 3 feel good here. That's definitely loose. This one's a little bit of pain. Heat shield's kind of in the way. Let's come out. All right. Get the back two. Just change the camera out here. Probably would be easier with the hood off. Okay, that one's good. I think we got one more. Okay. Okay, it's definitely good. Falling down now. Switch over to the gun. Try and zip them out really quick. Okay. Another thing I love about working on rust-free trucks is the bolts actually come out when you want them to. Good. All right. That one, difficult to get one. Cannot see this one whatsoever. All right, got that one. Heat shield definitely gets in the way. We're almost there. Drop that one in the heat shield. And the last one. I think we are off, and we are. I cut the exhaust up at the front with the Sawzall just to get it out of the way quickly because that exhaust will obviously be replaced. Right. Oh yeah, that's heavy. Obviously. Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. how. Looks pretty good to me. I'm not going to be painting the block or doing any of that. We'll replace the temperature sensor back there, put a new starter in it. Definitely ground cable, alternator. Looks like someone replaced the power steering pump, so I'm not going to touch that. So next up, let's pull off the valve cover and see what we got here. All right, just going to start from the front, work my way to the back. I'm very anxious to see what this valve train looks like underneath. I don't think there's going to be any issues of any kind because the engine seems to run smooth. My only really worry is that, like I said, all the seals are going to be all cracked and coming apart. And if that's the case, then we're going to have to consider pulling the head off this engine and doing a little bit of work to it. I don't know if there's one in the back here. There is. Right there. Mechanics yoga. Go. All right. Okay, here's the big moment. Grab the camera here. Let's see what we got. Try not to get any dirt and debris in there. Okay. Looks like the top end of a Ford 300 to me. Kind of hard to tell, obviously, if the valve guides are leaking or not. I think really the best way to do this is just to proceed with what I'm doing. Run it the way it is and just see how bad it smokes and whether it's just smoking because it was sitting or if it was just smoking because, you know, it had some oil in it. It'll be interesting to see if, you know, like a warm start, if it still smokes, maybe it's just leaking overnight. But the valve lash feels good and consistent on everything. So I don't really see any reason not to just clean this up as is and put it back together and see how it runs. So that's pretty much best case scenario. The one that I was talking about in the previous episode on my 66 F100 that I no longer have, when I pulled that one apart, cylinder 2, both of the rockers were off and something had happened in that cylinder, which is why I put a 351 in it. But looking back, that was definitely a mistake that I regret doing, and then subsequently sold that truck. Okay, next thing I want to do here is I want to pull the plugs off and let's see if we can get an indication of how the cylinders have been running. So let's do that next. Okay, got number 1 unplugged. You were seeing this as I see it for the first time. Reason you like to, it's great to pull the spark plugs out and look at them is you can see if it's running lean, running rich, if there's an issue of some kind. There's number 1, definitely dirty. Nothing abnormal looking, in my opinion. I will scope all these cylinders once everything's apart. I'm also going to pull the side cover off the engine, most likely, we'll see. Don't know if I'm going to pull the distributor out or not. It does look like it's a Motorcraft unit in there, so I'm probably just going to leave it alone since it did run. There's number 2. Looks identical. Side cover doesn't actually look like it's leaking at all, so I don't think I'm even going to bother pulling it off. Like I said, I'm not painting this engine or doing anything like that. The stage 1 upgrades that we're doing here are simply just to get it running nice so we can drive it. There's number 3. Identical to the first 2. All the wires are marked. I'm going to replace the wires and the cap and rotor and the coil. Also going to do the fuel pump on this side. I'm going to blow out all the fuel lines off camera, and I'm also going to replace the rear fuel tank along with the sending unit and do all the rubber lines as well. Obviously, when a vehicle's been sitting for as long as this one has, that's an absolute must. If there's any gas in the fuel tank, it is oil at this point. That one also looks fine. I'm not seeing any issues here. The fact that this engine started up and ran leads me to believe that this truck was not parked due to a major mechanical failure like my 66 F100 was. It's probably just parked because they just weren't driving it anymore. I don't really have all that information to confirm that. But it's just great when you're this far into taking something apart and nothing has broken. Of course, one bad bolt or nut can ruin your whole day. There's 5. And we'll get the last one in. Hopefully there's no surprises. I would say anyone with basic mechanical knowledge and a standard set of wrenches and sockets can do everything that I'm doing right now without really any much trouble whatsoever. This engine is so simple, and that's one of the things I love about it. Why is it always the last one that's the most difficult? I don't like how tight this is. Let's stop, spray some PB in there and give it a second. Okay, PB blaster. The problem or the solution to every mechanic's biggest problems. Hopefully. One in the back is always the worst. The only thing I can think is the cowl seal is missing on this truck, so maybe water was sitting in that cylinder where the plug was and it just got rusty. But the threads look fine and the burn pattern on the spark plug looks the same. Okay, so they're all out and I see no issues at this point why I can't just go ahead and install the new parts that I have after I clean up the block. We're going to do the water pump, alternator, the belts, the starter, the whole exhaust system, the exhaust manifold, the intake manifold, brand new Holley carburetor, valve cover gasket, coil, plugs, wires, spark plugs, fuel pump, lines, rear tank, oil change, and then once all that's done, we'll start it, we'll see how it runs, and then if it runs fine, we'll put it up in the air. We'll do a safety check on everything. We'll do the brakes, probably replace the shocks, and the 2 rear tires the belts are separated, so those will have to be replaced. Put the new tires on the front, and then we'll be able to drive this truck. Okay, so I took care of installing a lot of the boring stuff without filming it. Spark plugs in. Number 6, definitely the issue was from the cowl seal not being in there, and there must have been a little water that got into it, but the new spark plug went in fine. I did scope all of the cylinders. They all looked good. If there is an oil issue from one of the valves, it's probably cylinder 2. The top of the piston was a little bit dark on that one, but I don't think it's any real big issue. So we're just going to continue putting this thing together here. Cleaned up the valve cover, not a super good job, just put a new gasket on it. Water pump installed, fuel pump, oil filter, primed it, oil pressure gauge, all that fun stuff, new coil wires, all that. So we are done on that side of the engine at this point. Moving over to this side of the engine, we're going to get the Offenhauser intake, the Hedman header, and the Holley carb installed here next. So what I took care of without filming was getting the header in place. I did take the motor mount out in the front. You might be able to slip it in there without doing it, but it was just so easy just to pull the mount out that I just pulled it out to get it out of the way. I was also going to replace the starter, but the one I got from Rock Auto was not correct, so I'm just going to keep that starter in there. I would definitely say that once the header's on, probably can't remove the starter. I don't know. Good thing is this truck's a manual, so if anything ever happens, I can just start it without the starter anyway. Gonna use the factory, or the gasket that came with the Hedman kit. The nicer one from Mr. Gasket was out of stock, so see if that works or not. But let's get this installed and let's see how it goes here. All right, so get the gasket on first. I believe it goes, looks like it goes this way. There's a little protrusion that comes out of the side of the head to hold it in place. So I'm just gonna set that there for now. It looks to me like installing the intake first is definitely the way to go. The factory bolts, the studs that Amazon sent me were not the correct size, and I don't think they're really necessary anyway if your factory bolts are in good shape. Of course, having studs would be easier to install this instead of using the bolts, but I don't think it should be that bad. We'll find out. So I'm just going to get one in the back started. Studs would definitely be helpful for getting yourself started here, but mine didn't fit and I don't think they're going to be necessary anyway. Alright, so I got one bolt in the back of the intake. Now I'm going to slide the header up into place. I'm going to do the bolt in the front. Okay. Get one here just to hold this together. Get one back. Okay. Looks like that one's gonna have to be a stud. We'll find out once I get it tightened down. But alright, I'm not gonna bore you with getting the rest of these bolts in, so I'm gonna cut, get these bolts in, and then I'll let you know how it went, and then we'll get the carb on it. Okay, so I got all the bolts on. Essentially what I did was I got them all started, I snugged them up just a little bit, and then I started in the middle, worked my way to the outside, and the torque spec I went with was snug plus a little tiny bit. So you're not going to get a torque wrench on a lot of these bolts. So I think as long as they're all even and tight enough, then you're probably good. Set up, they could. So let's get the carburetor on here. The fun part, get our studs in first. So this truck has been, and I'm just going just tiny snug, because these are ARPs, super strong, and the intake is obviously aluminum, so you definitely do not want to over tighten these at all. This truck has been an absolute joy to work on thus far. It has not fought me at all, besides that one spark plug that was a little bit tight. That is now totally fine. It really has been a super fun day working on this truck. It's the thing of dreams, and it looks so much cooler. I know some people might be asking, well, why didn't I take the time to paint the engine and everything? Well, the reality is at some point, at some time, I'm going to pull this engine out of this truck and go through the whole thing and put a cam in it and make it stronger and all that. So this is really just so I can drive it, enjoy it. I want to see what it feels like. Even though I've owned one, I've never actually driven one. So I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, we got the studs on. Something you're going to need to do with this setup is you are going to have to run a carburetor spacer, because the throttle linkage will hit the intake right here if you don't. I initially bought a 2-inch and just thought it looked ridiculously too big. So I went with a 1, and you're gonna want, I'm running a dual plane intake, so you're gonna want the one that has the 4 barrels in it, instead of just being square. So gasket on top and bottom. And then for the carburetor. Okay. And there we go. The piece de la resistance. Alright, I'm not going to bolt the carb down now because I'm actually waiting on the Amazon truck to get here with my throttle linkage setup that I'm going to go with. Actually going to do a GM style throttle linkage on this. I think that's what's going to work best. We'll figure it out as we go here. One thing I'm concerned about is the fuel line and the throttle linkage are going to kind of cross over each other. You definitely don't want those two touching each other, because if the fuel line breaks, well, then it'd be dropping right onto the exhaust, and that would be a very bad day for the truck and me. So once we get that connected together, we'll see what the deal is. This carburetor is Holley's 390 CFM carburetor, specifically designed for this truck. It is 4 barrels. From what I've read, it's supposed to be the nicest one. We will see about that when it hopefully starts to run here. So the next thing that we have to do is get our starter wired in and put a new negative battery terminal on. So I'm going to cut again. I'm going to figure that out, and then once I get that back on, I will show you how I did it, and then we'll get the alternator on and the belts, and we'll be very close to being done here. Okay, so I got the starter wire hooked up. Here's how I did it. I ran it in between the header tube, and then I used the factory fuel line return bracket. I bent it a little bit, hammered it down, and I ran the starter cable underneath and through the motor mount, and then up here through the top. I replaced the starter relay, and I made sure to use a nice heavy gauge for the ground onto the motor, and a nice heavy gauge 4 gauge for the starter as well. So that should be ready to go at this point. So what we're going to do next is we are going to get the alternator bracket on, and then the alternator itself, and we're getting very close to being done here. Alright, get these started by hand here. I'm not cleaning a lot of the stuff up, I'm just making sure the bolts are good shape in good shape, and then just bolting it back down. And that's really it, because like I said, there will be a day when I take this apart again and do more than what I've done thus far. Okay. That. Give him a quick check. Looks good. Ratchet on that one. Been picking and choosing what to film as far as like live action assembly, because if it was the whole thing, then it'd be like 5 hours long, and I'm sure no one wants to watch a 5-hour video on this. So here's our clearance. Looks pretty good. Hopefully there's enough clearance there for the radiator hose. That looks a little tight, but so far everything is really going together without any snafus. So all that means is the very last thing will not go well at all, and that's probably going to be the throttle cable. But we will cross that bridge when we get there. Alternator. Alright, so the alternator just slides in here like this. It fits, then the bolt goes through the back. That fit, no problem, which is great. Let's get it started. It's fine if it's loose for right now. Alright, so what we got here is there's a bracket right here on the engine. And you can see, you just got to get it adjusted so it's in the correct radius with the alternator itself, which is right there. Then get the bolt started. I'm going to snap that in, and then we'll probably put the radiator back in this. Okay, so the alternator's in, wires are hooked up. We're going to be installing an 18-inch Flexolite fan, the pulley with this small little spacer. But remember how I just said it always seems like the last thing you're about to do for the day, something goes wrong? Well, there it is right there. I did not see this when I had originally took the radiator out. So this radiator is definitely no good, or it's at least not worth putting in. And the problem is, because this is a unique truck, Rock Auto doesn't have a radiator. No one has one for it. Had to order one from Champion. They're shipping it from California, so I'm not going to have it for this episode, unfortunately. So that's just the way it goes sometimes. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the fan on, because the radiator just slips right down in front of it because there's not enough room to get the bolts in with the radiator on. So we're going to slip that in, or put the fan on, the pulley and everything, and that's pretty much going to be it for this episode, because we are running out of time here for today. I was hoping to get this a lot farther than this today, but that's just the way it goes sometimes when you're building custom cars, or even just working on regular cars. Seems to be par for the course sometimes. So we're just going to get this as far as we can. First major hiccup with this truck. Not really a big deal. All right. Oh, I don't know what I'm thinking there. It'd help if I put the spacer on the right side. I like to put Flexolite, the nylon Flexolite fans on all of my trucks. It just seems to be, with these older trucks, it just seems to be the best way to keep them cool and running nice. So it's just something that I've gotten into the habit of doing. Seems to work good for me. All of my trucks with a 400 in it run nice with the Flexolite fan, so hopefully this one will run nice with the Flexolite fan. We'll see. Get this one started here. Tighten down by hand. Right. I don't know. Doesn't look like it's gonna work with that spacer. Gonna have to have a bigger spacer. Well, that's the way it goes when you're doing an unscripted car show. Sometimes things just don't work out. So with this spacer that I have, you can see here, might be easier to see on that side, just barely hits the crank. So, gonna have to stop there, get a slightly bigger spacer from Amazon. That one's not gonna fit. That's just the way it goes. Regardless, this has been a fun truck to work on. If you're enjoying our 79 F100 straight 6 budget build project, definitely subscribe to the channel. In the next episode, we're gonna fix these couple issues that we ran into. No big deal. And then we're going to put the truck up in the air, take a look at it for the first time, drain the oil out of it. We're gonna build a custom exhaust, probably put some shocks on it, make sure everything else is in good shape. And then we'll see if this thing will start. We'll put a fuel tank in it and hopefully get this thing running. Still waiting on my throttle bracket as well. We'll get that hooked up. So thank you. Please subscribe to the channel, and we hope to see you in the next episode.